Welcome to How to Play Aggressively Pre-Flop and Dominate Aggressive Players. This is Module 1 of this month's training. How to 3-bet like a god. And one of the awesome gods as well, probably Zeus or Thor or someone brilliant. Not one of the rubbish gods like that messenger one who just delivered messages fast. He was rubbish. So our mission is to really up our pre-flop aggression, but also to learn how to do it selectively and really understand what we're doing so we can dominate pre-flop play. Now, wherever you are with your pre-flop play and aggression and your 3-betting, this month, if you go through it, take the advice on board, especially the great advice that's coming from Kevin, and do the exercises I'm going to lay out for you, you're going to see a step change in your pre-flop aggression and your understanding of what you're trying to do. And that's going to just print you money for the rest of your poker career. It's going to make you so many chips. So I'm excited to bring this to you. Let's get into it. And first of all, I'm going to talk about the importance of pre-flop aggression. I'm sure you know that poker has changed a huge amount in the last 5-6 years, and perhaps nowhere more than in the pre-flop phase of the game, whether you're playing a cash or a tournament or whatever. You see very few kind of limped pots. Most pots are raised. There's so much more re-raising and re-raising, 3 and 4 betting, as they're now known. There wasn't even the term 3 and 4 betting about 5-6 years ago. And it's really, really important because basically what happened was a lot of very smart, very young people, annoyingly, came in, both on them being smart and young, came into poker and realised that you could exploit the game mathematically by being more aggressive pre-flop. Now, you don't need to understand the ins and outs of why, but as a basic rule, there are some massive advantages to being the more aggressive player pre-flop. So we need to learn them and how we can take advantage of them. The bottom line is that if you master pre-flop play, you can catapult your results. Just look at Jake Cody's winnings. You don't have to pick Jake Cody. You can pick any good, young, successful player. They are almost always good pre-flop. They're almost always very aggressive, but they know what they're doing. And that's what we're going to talk about this month. Now, you may not be doing this. You may not be that aggressive pre-flop. You may not 3-bet or 4-bet very often or 4-bet bluff very often. And you may be a little bit intimidated by it, or you may think it's not for you, or you may do it, but you don't really know how. It can be tricky, but the only reason it's tricky is because you haven't done it enough. Right near the end of this month's content, Kevin gives a great observation, which is that Jake and, Toby Lewis and Elke and everybody else on the planet that's good pre-flop, they weren't born knowing how to do it. They learned. And there's no reason why you can't learn and take this bit of your game to the next level. So we're going to make sure you do it more. First of all, to get you convinced that you want to do it more, let's just go back and say why you want to be the aggressive pre-flop. Well, first of all, it gives you free chips. Now, what I mean is, the occasions when you raise and everybody else folds, you win the money in the middle. Pretty straightforward, right? And you know this from just being the raiser, but it's also true, of course, if you're the re-raiser, if you're the 3-better, or if you're the 4-better. Anytime you pick up that pot without risk, that's a good situation. Now, of course, occasionally you have aces, perhaps you'd like a little action, whatever. But it's still true that it's massively mathematically, try saying massively mathematically 18 times, it's massive mathematically if you pick up chips with no risk in poker. Pre-flop aggression gives you that. It also gives you the lead pre-flop, and that translates into having the lead post-flop. Having the lead is really important in No Limit Hold'em. Most of the time neither player has a hand, especially post-flop, or they don't have a very strong hand, and the person that bets first, or if you like last, the person with the lead is the person with the advantage when neither player has anything. So being the aggressor pre-flop gives you that. And then finally, it bloats the pot when you have a big hand. So it works both ways. It can win you free chips, but when you have a big hand, you want to be, it's a standard staple of poker, you want to be investing money when you have a big hand. So it makes the pot bigger when you're in front. Lots of reasons to do it. And there's one extra reason, which is that it makes you someone players don't want to mess with, which equals more free chips. So free chips bonanza. Think about it yourself. You'll have experienced someone playing aggressively and well pre-flop at your table. It's intimidating. It's hard to play against. People stay out their way. They don't defend their blinds as much against them, and they don't, re-raise them in case they get 4-bet. You want to be that person. So my mission is to make sure that you are and explain to you how to become that. So we're going to start with mindset. Anything good that happens externally starts internally. And you have to have the right mentality about playing pre-flop. So the right mentality is an aggressive one. And I would define it in three things really: actively observing, planning, and attacking. So you need to be watching what's happening at your table. You need to know your players. You need to know their tendencies, which ones you can pick on, which ones are going to fight back, which ones will call pre-flop but then fold post-flop, and so on. And then you need to be constructing plans to take advantage of those tendencies. So you need to be thinking, I really want to get heads up with this player. I know this player doesn't call three bets. I really want to three bet bluff him a lot, or whatever it is. You want to have a plan, both overall for each opponent and also when you actually play a hand during it. As soon as you put money in the pot, I will say this so many times to you during our training together, you must always have a plan for the future. You've really got to train that muscle because it will give you such an advantage in the game. And then finally, you want to have an attacking mindset. And I would define that as every raise is an opportunity to three bet. Every time someone raises in front of you and the action gets to you, it's an opportunity to re-raise. Okay? Now, you're not going to take that opportunity most of the time, but you want to be asking the question always when the action gets to you, can I three bet here? That'll give you the right attacking mentality. The next mindset thing that you want to do is normalize three betting. I'm going to give you some exercises to do this later on. Some really good tips which will allow you to do this. And part of it is just practice. It's just doing it more so it becomes normal. But start off by seeing it not as a big deal or a big move. Yes, it's cool and sexy. I'm not denying that. I don't want to take the fun out of it. But it's definitely not, this huge deal that kind of makes you have sweaty palms. It's just another bet. And it's something that you should be doing. And here's the main reason to convince you to do it more. And here's the main reason that you should do it more, apart from all the other specific tangible reasons. This is 100% true. Please just take this on faith if you don't believe it right now. It makes hands easier to play. Re-raising and being aggressive pre-flop makes hands easier to play. And as I've put there, guessing in poker sucks almost as much as being passive. They both suck. So does being out of position. That sucks. But really, guessing in poker is horrible. So let me give you an example to make this real. Let's take a hand like a pair of nines. Okay, substitute any number of hands in between. Let's say a pair of nines. Somebody raises in front of you, and you decide to flat call with this hand. The flop comes king, queen, seven, and the original raiser bets. So the question is, are your pair of nines winning or not right here? Well, it doesn't really matter how much you know about poker or how good you are or stuff like that. You're still to a certain extent guessing, and for most of us mortals, you're guessing a lot there. It's very, very easy for you to be crushed. The open raiser could have ace queen, ace king, pair of jacks, whatever. It's easy for you to be beaten. You could also very easily be winning. You might have a pair of eights or a pair of fours or ace 10 or whatever. It's really, really hard to tell when you flat called like that against a standard opponent. Let's say that you three bet. Okay, now we're in business. If your original raiser decides to four bet you, well, most of the time against a standard opponent, you can throw those nines away because you're losing against the opponent's four betting hand. If he decides to flat call out of position and then check to you, which he almost always will do, let's look at the same flop, king, queen, seven with two nines. Well, here you're going to bet, because you've got a great chance to make better hands fold. Tens might fold, jacks might fold, queen jack might fold even, whatever. But you're so much more defined in the hand. And that's just one example. There are better examples. I should really prepare this stuff. But you take my point. Trust me, as you start to three bet more and you start to be aggressive pre-flop more, you'll see that it just makes poker an easier game to play. So that's the mentality we want to have. We're going to observe, plan, and attack. We're going to see everything as a three betting opportunity, and we're going to make three betting a normal part of our game. So how do we do that? Let's get to some basics for three betting. The question that you should be asking is, why three bet? What's your plan? There, I said it again. If you're drinking every time I say have a plan, you're going to be whammed after one module. Ask why you're three betting. So often I see players just make a re-raise because they have a certain hand or they feel like it or whatever. you really want to know why. And it breaks down like this. You're either going to be 3-betting for value or as a bluff or semi-bluff. You also get the lead, but that's not really why you're doing it. That's like, it's nice, as I put there. It's like an added benefit. It's like a stage 2 reason. But the main reasons are for value or as a bluff. So for value, I mean, you think you have the best hand and you want to increase the amount of money in the pot. Very, very standard. You know, poker's about looking for investment opportunities, if you like. So somebody raises, you pick up 2 queens, you think 2 queens is a better hand than the average hand, you know, that player's range, whatever. So you re-raise. Pretty straightforward. The other alternative is that you do it as a bluff or semi-bluff. So let's say somebody raises in a tournament late on, you think that they fold an awful lot of hands, you don't even look at your cards, you decide to re-raise. That's an out-and-out bluff. You might do it as a semi-bluff, and we're going to look at some specifics of this with a hand like 9-8 suited or 7-6 suited or something, with a hand that if you win the pot right now, that's great, but if they call your 3-bet, it's pretty easy to play post-flop. So that's how it's going to break down. You really don't want to be doing it for any other reason. So that's why you're going to 3-bet. So the question that people often ask next is how often to 3-bet. So I'm going to cover this, but I don't want you to make this the focus of your 3-betting re-raising plans. I'm just going to call it 3-betting from now on. I think that's easier. Otherwise I'm going to say re-raising and stuff. So how often do we 3-bet? I've put a rule of thumb here of between 5 and 8.5% as a good aggressive rate in a 100 big blind game. So if you're playing a cash game and your hold'em manager says you 3-bet 5 to 8.5% of the time, that's a good aggressive rate. That number, by the way, means every time there's a raise and it comes to you, it's how often in that situation you make a 3-bet. So a good number is 5 to 8.5%.
So how do we come up with that number? Well, one thing that I think you should do to really help your poker is to start using some poker software online, and software that allows you to see what hand ranges are included in what kind of percentage of hands or top range of hands or whatever. Now, there's lots of different software out there. You can use stuff like Equilab, which I think you can get for free if you Google it, Flopzilla, which you pay for, Odds Oracle, Pro Poker Tools. You can run simulations on there, and some online poker tracking software like Poker Tracker actually has this kind of software built into it. And what you can do is start playing with these ranges, so you can start to see and get familiar with kind of what is the top 5% of hands, what's the top 6% of hands, and so on. And the benefit to you of doing all of this is not to become sort of a maths expert. That's not what this coaching program's about, but it's just to become more familiar with the ranges of hands that people are playing and also that you should play. So to give you an example of what we're talking about with 3-betting, if you 3-bet 6.5% of your hands, that's going to be kind of pocket 8s plus, ace 10 suited plus, king queen suited and ace 10, and a few bluffs thrown in. If that's your kind of 3-betting range, I'm not saying it should be, then you're going to come up with about a 6.5% 3-bet range. If you see somebody betting that number, you've got a vague idea, a rough idea of what they're 3-betting. Now, I've just given you that information as a guideline. I do recommend you play around with the poker software to get more familiar, as I said. But I don't want you to 3-bet by numbers.
I want you to 3-bet situationally. Warning team, hold everything. Please don't think I have to 3-bet these particular hands all the time. Or, you know, Nick said I have to 3-bet 7% of my hands. That's not how you should think about this. That's not how you should think about anything in poker. As much as I can, I'll give you good rules to use, but mainly I want you to start thinking about poker really situationally, because how often as a number is the wrong question. It's what are the situations where I can 3-bet for value or 3-bet as a bluff or a semi-bluff. So you should always be thinking situationally. Just to give you an example to prove the point, if you're playing against someone that raised, every time they raised and you re-raised them, that they would always fold, then you could 3-bet 100% of the time, not 8%. Does that make sense? Because every time that they fold to you, you make money risk-free, so you'd always do it. So if you ever come across a player like that and you're playing him heads up, first of all, tell me his screen name, I'll pay you. And second of all, just re-raise him forever. So you're always going to think about the situation, about the players in the pot, and about what their tendencies are. To give you some examples, against weak players who call too much, you're going to 3-bet more for value. So hopefully that makes sense. If you are re-raising a raise and it's a weak player that calls that 3-bet too much, and we're going to look later at why you shouldn't be calling 3-bets very much, then you can raise them with a wider amount of hands, a greater number of hands, because, put simply, your average hand is still going to be better than their average hand because they're opening too many pots and defending too much. So to put an example on, you can 3-bet ace 10 because they will call you with ace 8. Very simple example. And the reverse is true against aggressive players who open raise a lot. They're open raising a lot of crap hands. So if they open 70% of hands on the button, well, it becomes very profitable to 3-bet bluff them because they have to fold so many of those hands. So they might open king 7 suited or some rubbish. You might hold jack 9, which is a worse hand, but they have to fold their king 7 a lot when you 3-bet bluff them. So that's just a couple of general rules as to how we're going to adapt situationally. So let's talk about 3-bet sizing and the logistics, nuts and bolts of 3-betting, if you like, having talked about when we should do it. And you do see some people kind of get confused about this or get this wrong. So we won't spend too long on this, but just to cover it off, the basic principle is you're going to bet slightly more if you 3-bet out of position from the blinds than if you 3-bet in position against an opening raiser. And this is the same principle as with opening raises. If you make an open raise out of the small blind, you want to make your out of position raises slightly larger because your opponents get to play in position against you, so you want to charge them a premium for doing that. That's the basic principle. So as a rule of thumb for 3-betting, in position you can 3-bet more or less 3 times the opening raise as a standard. Out of position a little bit bigger, maybe 3.5 times the opening raise. So, and you'll probably find that there's a standard 3-bet amount in your games. If you play cash games online or even tournaments, that sometimes happens because the online software has a standard amount kind of built in. People click 3x or whatever it happens to be. And so just to be clear, let's say you're playing 50 cent a dollar, the opening raises to $3, your 3-bet's going to be $9 or there or thereabouts in position, $10.5 out of position. So that's a kind of rule of thumb for you. Now, as with when you bet, bet sizing is situational and of course can be varied. I say situational a lot when I do training because everything that I teach you, you should then take and apply not as a kind of step-by-step, this is what I do system, but these are the tools I need and I'm going to figure out how they apply to my situation because that's the nature of poker. So here's a couple of just ideas as to why you'd vary your 3-bet size and a couple of examples where you can change it. So let's say you're playing late in a tournament where the stacks are shallow and the pressure's really on. There you can 3-bet much smaller and you might 3-bet close to just double the opening raise, just a little bit more than clicking it back if you like. And the reason for that is the stacks are much shallower compared to the money in the middle. The stack to pot ratio is lower, which means a couple of things. It means that if we do a really big 3-bet, then we're going to be committed if somebody shoves, so we'll end up having to call off our money, and if we're bluffing, that's bad. And the big implication of a shallower stack and a smaller opening raise, 3-bet, sorry, is that it's the same decision our opponent faces, because our opponent will know he can't really call because he'll be pot committed so many times after the flop, so he basically has to fold or shove. So that decision doesn't change whether we make our 3-bet just over the minimum or whether we make it 3 and 3.5 times the raise, if you see what I mean. So in situations where the 3-bet can be just as effective as a bluff, such as late in a tournament, you can raise much smaller. Now there are situations where the opposite can be true. So let's say you're playing a calling station. I've put live on the screen on the slide. I'm not quite sure why, because obviously there are calling stations online too, and plenty of them. I just associate it with live, I guess. If you're playing a calling station and your 3-bet, you're not going to 3-bet bluff them very much, or certainly not too often, and you're going to 3-bet them for value a lot, as we just discussed before, then you can make your 3-bets a bit bigger, because if they're going to call with the same number of hands, effectively it's a value bet. You're just extracting more chips, aren't you? So consider making your 3-bets bigger, maybe greater than 3x the initial raise, maybe even slightly bigger than the pot on occasion, if you've got somebody that's just going to call your 3-bet regardless. Okay, so that's a word on bet sizing, and a couple of factors to consider if you're deciding to vary it. But if you stick with that rule of thumb of 3 times the opening raise in position, 3.5 out of position, or thereabouts, you're not going to go far wrong. Okay, let's put things together and just look at a hand example, just to kind of really get the message across. And the thing I really want to drill in is this idea of 3-betting with a wider range and the benefits of doing that by working through a hand. And let me show you the good things that happen to your poker game when you 3-bet hands with a slightly wider range. So let's take an example where we're playing in position against a relatively weak player at 25 cent, 50 cent. Obviously it could be whatever limit. We've got 100 big blind stacks, we've got a full cash stack, and our opponent opens from mid position to a pretty standard $1.50. We're in position, let's say we're in the cutoff for argument's sake, and we hold ace jack suited. Now, I don't really think anyone on the planet is folding, or not very often anyway. We're certainly not going to. We could flat call, but we're actually going to 3-bet. And we're going to 3-bet for a number of reasons. A lot of good things happen when we do that. In fact, many good things can happen, and almost no bad things can happen when we 3-bet as opposed to flat call in this situation against a weak or even an average player. So let's look at some of the outcomes when we make this 3-bet with a hand like ace-jack suited. The first thing that could happen is that our opponent could fold. Now this is a win. It's actually quite a significant win for us. We've instantly picked up 4.5 big blinds when he makes this fold, which is a lot of money. Now it doesn't seem like a lot of money because it's a small pot, but if you could pick up 4.5 big blinds uncontested on a regular basis, 2 or 3 times an hour, it's going to massively add to your bottom line, and it's also the case that very often against players that aren't really strong players, they're going to be folding a worse hand a lot of the time. They're going to be folding, small pocket pairs. Sorry, a better hand, not a worse hand, I do apologise. They're going to be folding like small pocket pairs where they technically have a small edge. They may even fold, the same hand like ace-jack, or maybe even ace-queen if they're really tight. So they might even fold a better hand, or one that had a small edge over us. But either way, when they fold, it's almost always great news for us. The second thing that can happen when we make this 3-bet is that he can 4-bet. And that puts us in a position to play perfectly, and we can safely fold. So this is also a win. Not as good a win as him folding, I'll give you that, because we're not going to win this pot. But players, until you get to kind of the intermediate levels, and then only good players, just don't 4-bet bluff. You almost never see it. Certainly not very often, and certainly not until you 3-bet people, to the point that their patience snaps. They very rarely 4-bet bluff. So if you've targeted this person as a weak player or even just an average player at a lot of stakes, then when he 4-bets, you can make a really safe fold. You know your ace-jack is crushed. He's going to have the standard aces, kings, queens, ace-king, and he's got us crushed. So we can 4-bet. So we can safely fold to the 4-bet, which may not seem like a good thing, but actually it saves us money a lot of the time, because if we'd flat called with the ace-jack, which we now know to be the worst hand, then we can lose further money down the street. So although we lose our 3-bet, it actually is a minimal loss, and it's more than paid for by the number of times we get an instant fold, or the number of times the third outcome happens, which I will smoothly move on to. The other good thing that can happen is that he can call our 3-bet. Now, we're going to go on to talk in some depth about why calling 3-bets, especially out of position, is really bad. Red light with sirens and flashing and stuff. It's really bad most of the time. And we're never going to be that sorry when our opponent calls our 3-bet when we 3-bet with a good hand. It gives us a huge edge. A decent amount of time we have the best hand. He's calling us with the worst hand. But whether we have the best hand or not, we've got a couple of things that give us a huge edge. First of all, we're in position. Being in position is incredibly powerful in No Limit Hold'em. I'm sure I don't need to point that out to you. It just is. And the second thing is we have the lead in the hand. The vast majority of the time, after he's defended against our 3-bet, he's going to check to us, and we have the initiative. Most of the time, we'll be able to bet, and those continuation bets in 3-bet pots are extremely profitable. So let's say he has, let's give him ace queen and say he calls with ace queen, and both of us miss the flop. Well, when we both miss the flop, it comes 10 high or whatever, we're going to win the vast majority of those pots because he's just going to check and give up when we bet, fearing that we've got a made hand, got a pair, whatever. So having the lead in 3-bet pots, because weak players actually play tighter post-flop, and I'll do a month in this program on post-flop pots for 3 and 4-bet pots, I think, because it's a big area. But people play tight and they fold too much, so we have an edge and we go into the flop with the lead. So lots of good things happen when you 3-bet that slightly wider range and really start opening up your game and putting a bit more pressure on people. And the last thing to think about with this is just how much easier it is to play when you're 3-betting versus when you're flat calling. Now we'll go on to look at some situations in another module where flat calling against an aggressive player is better than 3-betting. But for now, most of the time, your hand is easier to play when you 3-bet. And that may be counterintuitive. And so it's worth repeating. And hopefully this example will show you why. Because it just defines your opponent's hand so much better and gives you the lead in the hand so much more often, as well as giving you a chance to win it instantly. It's just so much easier to play poker when you're the 3-better, when you're the aggressor. So that's the focus of all of the stuff that we're doing this month, is making you in that position where poker is not only more profitable, but also easier to play. So here's some steps to actually getting it into your game. You're going to play a game called the 3-bet or fold every time. So for the next 3 sessions, you are not allowed to flat call an opening raise. You are only allowed to re-raise or fold. So it doesn't matter what type of game you're playing in. Of course, this doesn't include all-in calls. If you're late in a tournament, that should stand to reason. But when somebody raises, you may not call them. You may only 3-bet or fold. This is going to mean that you 3-bet more, and it's going to make you think about the situations where you face a raise more. So I want you to make a note of how players react to you, how players react when they get 3-bet, how it helps your game, and also, and also the tough spots it creates. It really will create a new dynamic for you, and it will make 3-betting much more common. If you want to move down a limit to do this, to be more comfortable, that's fine, but please do it, because you'll never get better at pre-flop aggression unless you actually go out there and start being aggressive pre-flop. Hope that makes sense. The second exercise I want you to do on this is to go over your missed 3-bet opportunities. So go back through some hands if you've got online tracking software. If you don't have that, play some normal sessions where you're not playing the game in step 1. And make a note of maybe 7 or 8, maybe keep making a note of hands till you get to that amount, of where you've called an opening raise, and analyse that spot. Ask, could I have 3-bet here as a bluff? Because I think I could get him to fold a lot, pre-flop or post-flop. Could I 3-bet for value because I actually have a hand that's better than his opening range? Or even should I have folded because I was just trying to hit the flop and that's not good poker or whatever? Make a note of those missed 3-betting opportunities and what opportunity you missed. Again, I just want you to train your brain to be more aggressive and to look for those re-raising opportunities. Okay, great. That I think will really, really help you out. Please go back over this session, make sure it's all gone in, and really start experimenting with things in your game. Coming up in Module 2, it's a great one. We're going to get Kevin involved. He's got some fantastic advice on dealing with aggressive players pre-flop. So we're both getting you aggressive and teaching you how to dominate the people that already do it. It's going to be really good. So good luck with this module, and let's get to the second one. See you there.